Imagine trudging through the wild, mist-shrouded hills of 16th century Scotland. The wind howls, carrying the scent of salt from the distant sea, and the faint, sickly sweetness of decay. Oh, you're a weary traveler, eyes darting to every shadow, clutching your cloak tighter as you approach the lonely stretch between Girvan and Ballantrae. They raised a brood of children and grandchildren, 45 in all. According to legend born of incest and isolation, a clan bound by blood and horror. The cave became both fortress and abattoir, its walls hung with limbs, barrels brimming with pickled flesh, the floor littered with the spoils of countless victims. Bodies never returned, but grisly remains pickled limbs. Bones would sometimes wash ashore, fueling rumors of wild beasts or witches. The beans became a folk terror, a story whispered by firesides to frighten children and warn travelers. The legend grew with every retelling, the details more lurid, the sense of helplessness more profound. Suspicion fell on innkeepers, the last to see many victims alive, and innocent people were hanged in the desperate search for justice. A married couple returning from a fair was set upon by the clan. The searchers, guided by the stench of rotting flesh, finally discovered the cave at low tide. By torchlight, they entered a nightmare. Human remains hanging from the walls. Barrels of limbs, piles of stolen heirlooms, and the entire Bean clan cowering in the shadows. The horror was now undeniable. The myth made flesh. The husband, trained in combat and armed, fought desperately, holding off the attackers long enough for a crowd of festival-goers to appear and drive the Beans back into the darkness. For the first time, a survivor could tell the tale. The alarm was raised, and the story reached the ears of King James VI himself. Yet the killings continued, and the true culprits remained hidden, their nocturnal raids undisturbed by the outside world. By night, the Beans emerged like phantoms, ambushing travelers with military precision, dragging the bodies back to their lair to be butchered and devoured. It is a tale that forces us to confront the darkest corners of human nature, the thin line between civilization and savagery, and the terrifying power of a family united not by love, but by hunger and fear. What they couldn't eat, they preserved or tossed into the surf, letting the sea carry away the evidence. The locals whisper of disappearances, of travelers who vanish without a trace, their last footprints swallowed by mud and darkness. But no one dares speak the name that haunts these roads, Sawney Bean. Now step into the world of Scotland's most infamous legend, a tale so grotesque that it sent shudders through the kingdom and sparked a nationwide panic. Sawney Bean, born Alexander Bean, was said to be the son of a ditch digger in East Lothian. A man who found honest work too taxing and instead fled with a woman as vicious as himself, Agnes Black Douglas. Together, they carved out a life in the shadows, settling in a sea cave at Benin Head, a cavern so deep and well hidden that its entrance was swallowed by the tide twice a day, sealing its secrets from the world. Inside this damp, echoing labyrinth, the Beans began a reign of terror that would last a quarter of a century. The contradiction at the heart of this legend is immediate and visceral. A family. The most basic unit of trust and nurture, transformed into a machine of predation and cannibalism. The clan's existence was an affront to every social and moral code: incest, murder, and the consumption of human flesh.
Ow.
Hidden beneath the unremarkable surface of the Scottish wilds, the horror was not just in the acts themselves, but in the system that allowed them to persist undetected for decades. The cave was a world apart, a parallel society where the unthinkable became routine. For the villagers nearby, the disappearances were a source of mounting dread. The psychological toll was immense. Imagine living in a land where every journey could end in slaughter, where the woods and roads themselves seemed to conspire against you. The turning point came with a single failed ambush. What followed was a royal manhunt, a mobilization of 400 men and bloodhounds, scouring the land for the source of the terror. This is only the beginning of the Sawney Bean legend, a story that would echo through Scottish folklore and beyond, inspiring novels, plays, and even horror films. The discovery of Sawney Bean's cave was a moment that Scotland would never forget. Imagine the searchers, torches in hand, stepping into the darkness. The air is thick with the smell of salt, rot, and something far worse. As their eyes adjust, the horror becomes clear. Human limbs hang from the walls like sides of beef, Barrels overflow with pickled flesh. Bones litter the ground. In the shadows, the Bean family huddles together. Men, women, and children, all gaunt, wild-eyed, and silent. This was not just a hideout, it was a world turned upside down. The cave was both home and slaughterhouse. They were dragged into the daylight, blinking and silent, their crimes exposed for all to see. The horror of what had been discovered left no room for doubt. How had the Beans managed to evade capture for so long? The cave still stands, visited by those curious or brave enough to enter. It is a warning about the dangers that can grow in isolation, about the power of fear to shape a community, and about the thin line that separates civilization from savagery. The echoes of their deeds still ripple through Scottish folklore, a chilling reminder that sometimes the monsters we fear most are not born, but made. The legend is a reminder of how quickly fear can grow, how communities can be haunted by what they cannot see, and how the darkest horrors sometimes hide in plain sight. The answer lay in their isolation, in the secrecy of their cave. Why had they turned to cannibalism? Some said it was necessity, others believed it was pure evil. Did they feel remorse? The witnesses said their eyes were empty, their faces blank, as if they had forgotten what it meant to be human. The men were executed first, their bodies torn apart as punishment for their crimes. The women and children followed, burned at the stake so that nothing would remain. The executions were public, meant to bring closure, but the fear lingered. The evidence was everywhere: bones, barrels, stolen goods, and the haunted faces of the children who had never known another world. Meals were not shared around a hearth, but carved from the bodies of strangers. When the moment was right, they struck with speed and precision, overwhelming their victims and dragging them back to the cave. Nothing was wasted. The bodies were butchered, the meat preserved, valuables hidden away. What could not be used was thrown into the sea, letting the tides carry away the evidence. The children of Sawney Bean had never known another way of life. Disappearances were common, but explanations were always just out of reach. Some blamed highwaymen, others spoke of wild animals or witches. When body parts washed up on the shore, panic spread. Innocent people were accused and punished, but the truth remained hidden. The idea that an entire family could be responsible was too terrible for most to believe. They were born into darkness, raised on human flesh, taught to hunt and kill as a family. The legend of Sawney Bean grew with each retelling. Parents warned their children not to stray too far. Travelers moved in groups or avoided the area altogether. Fear was not just of death, but of something worse, of being consumed, of vanishing without a trace. The acts that would horrify the outside world were, for them, routine. The clan's methods were chillingly organized. By night, they watched the roads for travelers moving alone or in small groups. For the people living nearby, fear became a way of life. The psychological impact was deep. Imagine living in a place where every journey could be your last, where the landscape itself seemed to hide monsters. When the royal search party finally found the cave, the truth was more shocking than any rumor. The Bean family did not resist. The trial was swift. There was no defense, no plea for mercy. Questions remained. The story of Sawney Bean left a scar on Scotland's memory. The tale of the Bean family is more than just a story of crime. In the wake of the Bean family's capture and execution, Scotland found itself gripped by a strange mixture of relief and lingering dread. The nightmare was over, but the scars it left behind would shape the nation's imagination for centuries. The cave at Bennin Head, once just another shadow on the wild coast, became a place of pilgrimage for the curious and the fearful. People came to peer into the darkness, to see for themselves the lair where civilization had been turned inside out. The legend of Sawney Bean did not fade with the family's deaths. There is little hard evidence to prove that the Beans ever existed as described. The anxiety that beneath the surface, our neighbors might not be as civilized as they seem. The Beans became a mirror in which Scotland could see its own darkness, its capacity for violence, and its desperate need to believe that monsters are always out there, never among us. Some historians believe the story was exaggerated, or even invented, to serve as propaganda, an example of Scottish barbarity, meant to justify harsh laws and royal intervention. Tourists come to take photos, to shiver at the thought of what once happened here. It is a meditation on fear, on community, and on the darkness that can grow in the cracks of society. It is a reminder that the monsters we fear most are not always creatures of legend. They can be made slowly and quietly, by hunger, by isolation, and by the refusal to see what is right in front of us. But the real legacy of Sawney Bean is not in the stones or the bones. It is in the questions the story leaves behind. How well do we really know our neighbors? What horrors might grow in the places we refuse to look? And how thin, after all, is the line between civilization and savagery? Others see it as a folk memory of real crimes, magnified by fear and retold until fact and fiction became inseparable. The Sawney Bean legend warns us about the dangers of isolation, how people, cut off from the world and from one another, can become something monstrous. It is a warning, a challenge, and perhaps a call to look more closely at the world around us. For in every community, there are shadows, and, in every shadow, the possibility of horror, but also the hope that, by facing it, we might finally lay the ghosts to rest. It also warns about the power of denial, about the ways in which fear can blind us to the truth, allowing evil to grow in the shadows. Instead, it grew, branching into countless retellings, each more vivid and terrifying than the last. For many, the story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of isolation and secrecy. It inspired everything from Gothic novels to horror films. The idea of the hidden cannibal clan preying on the unwary became a trope that echoed far beyond Scotland's borders. In the 20th century, films like The Hills Have Eyes and even The Texas Chainsaw Massacre drew on the same primal fears. The terror of being lost, the horror of being hunted, the nightmare of a family bound not by love but by bloodlust. It was a reminder that evil could flourish not just in distant lands, but close to home, hidden, perhaps in the very people you passed on the road. Parents used the story to frighten children into obedience. Don't stray too far, or Sawney Bean will get you. The story of Sawney Bean is also about resilience, the determination of a community to confront its fears, to hunt down the monsters in its midst, and to reclaim the daylight from the darkness. The royal manhunt, the public executions, the retelling of the tale-all, these were ways for Scotland to say, we will not be ruled by fear. We will not let the shadows win. Travelers remembered it as they crossed lonely stretches of moorland, glancing over their shoulders at every sound. In taverns and cottages, around fires, and in the flickering candlelight of city streets, the story was told and retold. A warning, a ghost story, a way to explain the unexplainable. The details shifted with each generation. Sometimes the number of victims swelled. Sometimes the cave grew deeper. Sometimes the beans themselves became almost supernatural in their cunning and cruelty. But the core of the legend remained. A family that had become a pack, a community that had failed to see the danger in its midst. In a world where the line between order and chaos was always thinner than it seemed. The psychological impact of the Beans' crimes lingered long after their bones had turned to dust. But the legend also served a deeper function. It was a way for society to process its own fears about poverty, about hunger, about the breakdown of order. In a land where famine and violence were never far away, the Beans became a symbol of everything that could go wrong. When the bonds of community were broken, their story was retold in broadsheets and ballads, in plays and penny dreadfuls, each version reflecting the anxieties of its time. The historical irony is sharp. For all its horror, the tale of Sawney Bean is also a story about the power of myth. Yet, whether true in every detail or not, the legend endures because it speaks to something universal. The fear of the unknown. The suspicion of the outsider. As time passed, the story of Sawney Bean was woven into the fabric of popular culture. Modern parallels are not hard to find. Even today, society is haunted by stories of hidden crimes, of communities that look the other way until it is too late. Yet, there's another lesson in the legend's endurance. Today, the cave at Benane Head is quiet. The sea still washes in and out, erasing footprints and carrying away secrets. The tale of the Cannibal Banquets of Sawney Bean endures, because it is more than just a story of crime. So as you leave the shadow of the cave and step back into the light, let the legend linger.